My name is Monica. In this presentation, I would explore different perspectives in psychology. There are 5 psychology perspectives: behaviorism, cognitive psychology, psychoanalysis or psychodynamic psychology, biological psychology, and social psychology. In the first part of my presentation, I will focus on describing behaviorism and biological psychology, the key assumptions, the leading theories, and analyzing similarities and differences between them. The last part of my presentation evaluates the application of 2 perspectives to contemporary issues in psychology. Behaviorism can be learned directly or indirectly. There are 2 types of behaviorism: radical, where behavior is understood by observing the environmental factors and stimuli to trigger the response, and social learning, where behavior can be repeated and copied based on observing the role model. The first concept of behaviorism, classical conditioning, occurs when the unconditioned response is caused by unconditioned stimuli and previously neutral conditioned stimuli. The second concept, operant conditioning, explains how consequences can lead to changes in voluntary behavior through positive reinforcement or punishment. Key assumptions of behaviorism. Behavior can be observed and measured. Observing and collecting data from experiments helps understand both human and animal reactions to stimuli. The nurture approach refers to the idea that our behavior is based on environmental factors such as social interactions. Experiments on animals can be extended to humans, as both groups demonstrate similar learning patterns. The use of lab-controlled experiments to measure behavior opened a scientific approach in behavioral psychology. The main strength of psychological perspective are credibility within physical lab control and experiments and a collection of the data to prove previous theories. 2 central concepts were used to expand psychological treatment, for an example, to treat phobias. Behaviorism limitation is the exclusion of any other concept of psychological perspective, such as biological approach, which defines the role of our brain in being responsible for our behavior. Ivan Pavlov is the first of 3 main theories in behaviorism. He discovered classical conditioning by accident while researching the dog's digestive system. Pavlov used a bell as a neutral stimulus, and the dog associated the sound with food and started to salivate without food being presented. The experiment proved that environmental stimuli previously neutral can be manipulated to adjust behavior. His work was published in 1897. The discovery of stimuli builds a response model that helps to better understand phobias and bring the ability to future treatments. The only limitation in Pavlov's work is the fact that the dog behavior cannot fully reflect more expanded and complex human behaviors. The second main theory of behaviorism is John Brodus Watson. He is credited with collecting the work of other psychologists and creating the term behaviorism. Watson brought this psychology perspective to a scientific field, believing that behavior cannot be measured with the outside world. He performed the first experiment in a lab-controlled environment on a human. In 1920, Mr. Watson, together with his student Rosalind Rayner, performed a controversial experiment at Johns Hopkins University. Controversial as the subject was little Albert, who was only 9 months old. Albert, at first, was pleased to see the rat, but when Mr. Watson added a loud noise as a stimulus, the toddler became upset. Watson learned that he could build a fear in little Albert. Watson believed he could create a specific environment to any healthy child to train them to become any specialist he would select. The experiment brought lots of criticism, as it was unethical to expose 9-month-old to negative emotions. The third main theorist in behaviorism was an American psychologist and the father of radical behaviorism, Burrhus Frederick Skinner. He believed that the internal processes has a reflection on the behavior and they could be analysed. Skinner was also the father of operant conditioning, where behavior can be modified based on outcomes and consequences, with positive or negative reinforcement. His experiment was called a Skinner box and was performed on rats and pigeons. Animal interactions and behaviors were observed when they received a reward or without one. Skinner's research significantly contributed to understanding and shaping behaviorism. The main criticism in his theory was a heavy reliance on studying and analysing animal interactions, which wouldn't apply to human complex behaviour. The biological psychology centres the brain and specific parts of the brain as responsible for human behaviours. The history of perspective dated back to even before 18th, 19th century, when philosophers continued the question of connection between mind and body. Biopsychology subject evaluates to conclude that our behaviour, feelings and thinkings are regulated by Number 1. Neurons are basic blocks that build the whole nervous system, and they are responsible for the chemical and electrical exchange of messages. Number 2, brain regions are center of the nervous system. Different parts of the brain are responsible for our abilities. Number 3, neurotransmitters are chemicals that transmit specific signals between neurons and the brain. Number 4, genes and genetic factors are inherited from family, for example, parents. To analyze link between brain and behavior, researchers used lab experiments including animals, humans, case studies, observations and technology such as MRI and EEG scans. The three main key assumptions of biological psychology are: number 1, brain structures are responsible for our behavior and abilities. Number 2, genes determine the level of intelligence and behavior is inherited from DNA and might highlight the probability of mental disorders. Number 3, neurotransmitters such as dopamine or serotonin are the basis of explaining behavior, thoughts and feelings. The main strength of biopsychology is credibility. Experiment research and surgical examination provide evidence to explain the link between the brain and the behavior, validating previous theories. The use of technology strongly supports the study and research results. A limitation of biopsychology concept is the exclusion of the nature-environmental factors, advocating that behavior is purely biological response. Another limitation is the assumption of direct link between the human brain and behavior, excluding the individual approach. Biological psychology has been criticized for performing surgical procedures to examine brain and gain actual evidence in the research. The first key theorist in biological psychology was the French physician, anatomist and anthropologist Paul Broca. He made significant contributions to understanding the brain and its function, particularly to speech ability. Broca is most recognized for his research on the Brain Language Center, which later became known as Broca's area. The main experiment was based on a patient, Louis Le Bon, who suffered a stroke and lost his ability to speak. One of the words he could say was tan, and this word became his nickname in the research. Upon Stan's death, Broca conducted an autopsy which revealed damage to the left frontal lobe of the brain. Broca proved the link between this part of the brain and speech ability. Later on, this defect caused by head injury, stroke or infection was medically called Broca's aphasia. The second key theory in biological psychology was a German physician, anatomist, psychologist and neuropathologist Karl Wernicke. Inspired by Paul Broca research, Karl Wernicke discovered the function of the posterior part of the left temporal lobe to language comprehension and speech understanding. Later on, this part of the brain was medically called Wernicke's area. He performed many post-mortem examinations on patients with speech disorders. Speech disorders related to the posterior part of the left temporal lobe are called Wernicke's aphasia. A patient with this condition can produce fluent speech, but sentences lack meaning, making it difficult to listeners to understand. Behaviorism and biological psychology, in comparison, show some similarities as well as differences. In similarities, they have a strong connection in both psychological perspectives related to: number one, hard determinism. Hard determinism excludes the research subject, both animal and human, from individual control over the behavior they present. In behaviorism, it is believed that subject behavior is a pure response to environmental stimuli. Biological psychology links human behavior to brain activity and specific messages. Both perspectives exclude the concept of free will in subject decision-making. Number two, reductionism. Reductionism relates to how the research was performed. Study only isolated elements of subject behaviors and mental process divided into smaller, simpler components. Behaviorism presents a simple response related to human and animal environmental stimuli, for example, a dog salivating when a bell rings. Biological psychology takes a wide spectrum of behavior to a simplistic physical level. Number three, empirical research. Empirical research relates to the methods used in the research process to collect the data through experiments. Behaviorism research was based on lab-controlled experiments performed on animals and later on humans to observe and analyze, for example, the Little Albert experiment. Biological psychology research method was based on collecting and analyzing data from patients, behaviors and abilities such as speech, and performing post-mortem examinations to support the research findings. For example, Paul Broca experiment on a patient named Louis Le Bon. In comparing these two psychology perspectives, there's only one difference between them, which is the factor. Behaviorism refers to the nurture factor, where behavior is associated with reaction to environmental stimuli such as sound or object. Biological psychology refers to the nature factor, where behavior is related to the message sent from the brain to the body. Mental health and well-being are contemporary issues where the psychological perspectives can be applied. Approximately 1 in 4 people in the UK will experience mental health problems each year. In 1960, Aaron Beck developed cognitive behavioral therapy, known as CBT. The primary focus is on the relationship between feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. CBT is used to treat any mental health related disorders such as anxiety, depression, or eating disorders. The main advantage of CBT is a short process, as therapy usually takes between 5 to 20 sessions. The therapist makes an initial assessment to identify the negativity that needs to be challenged. The therapy plan is well structured and includes different coping techniques. Depending on the patient plan, CBT can be combined with medication. The initial plan can be revised and adjusted to meet personal needs. Also, therapy can be performed on a group of people. The main disadvantage of CBT is the focus of the present situation rather than considering the past, where the source of the negative thoughts and emotions is not explored. Group sessions are not always practical as they exclude the holistic approach and might not suit everyone's individual needs. According to the Mental Health General website, CBT has a high dropout rate, as many patients do not complete the therapy. A personal plan requires commitment and continued effort even after the CBT is finished. By learning, patient is expected to recognize negative thoughts and apply coping techniques to eliminate them. Different perspectives of psychology can also be applied to workplace and organizational issues, including teamwork, leadership styles, employee motivation, and work-life balance. The behaviorist principle of operant conditioning is applicable through the use of positive reinforcement, such as employee recognition and rewards, to improve work satisfaction, motivation, and overall performance. Increased recognition and job satisfaction lower the rate of retention. However, recognition is not always positive and can lead to a negative experience for other employees who didn't receive the reward. Workplace and organizational structures issues might be more complex than being fixed by rewarding. Positive reinforcement can create a competitive atmosphere among the team. Additionally, a non-transparent process of selecting rewarded team members creates an exclusion for some employees. Psychology shaped our understanding of human behavior related to environmental and biological factors. Continued research and experiments performed by psychologists significantly contributed to recognizing and treating mental health disorders and modern contemporary issues. Thank you for listening.